Okay, everyone, welcome. Let me allow. Okay, I'm going to share. So welcome to our lunchtime learning webinar. We want everyone to realize that we do have Spanish interpretation. If you require that, you would see the icon at the bottom of your screen, the globe. You hit the language that you would like to see. And you tap on that and you'll start hearing the language in the Spanish if you need that. And then you can toggle to mute the original audio, which means you won't hear the English, you'll just hear the Spanish. So if you have any issues with that, just let us know. So this is the Real Transition Partners Lunchtime Learning Webinar. Welcome. My name is Monaco. I am the project director here at SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. We are located in New Jersey. However, Real Transition Partners is a collaborative project managed by SPAN, which is in New Jersey, the Federation for Children with Special Needs in Massachusetts, Include NYC, which is in Manhattan, the Parent Network of Western New York in Buffalo, and Starbridge in Rochester, New York. And so we provide information, training, technical assistance, and support to not only parent center staff, but also to youth and young adults with disabilities and their families and professionals. So just a little housekeeping. When we have large numbers, we ask that you all mute yourselves so that the presentation does not get interrupted. If you are struggling with that, I can do that. I have the ability to mute you as well. So the presenter has said she does not mind taking questions during the presentation. So you could either raise your hand or you could put it in the chat, or if you need to, you can unmute yourself, but I will be monitoring the chat. So if you put a question in the chat, I can make her aware of that. And then I will also be putting some links in the chat for you. You will receive a copy of this presentation afterwards. We always get that question. Yes, you'll receive that, and you will receive a copy of the recordings. That will be emailed out through Eventbrite, which is where you registered for this. So you'll get that in a couple of days. Also, I will have a poll at the end for you to give us your thoughts. We do want to hear what you think about this presentation. So please complete that poll at the end. You'll see it. We're going to do that. We will have question and answers at the end as well. But if you want us to answer a question during it, just go ahead and put that in the chat. So today I have with me Tanya Weishman. She is with the Parent Network of Western New York, which I had mentioned is in Rochester. She's getting snow as we speak. I think she just told me she already has 3 feet of snow and they're getting more. And so I'm welcoming her. She's done many presentations for us in the past. She will give you more information about herself. Welcome, Tanya. You have sharing capabilities, so you can go ahead and share your own screen, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again, and thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us for this lunch hour. I'm trying to... All right, so today we're here to talk about the VR process. And I know many of you have probably been attending these series throughout time, and you know that Voc rehabilitation has been that focus. And today what I really wanted to do was take the opportunity to kind of talk about everyone's role in this process. So that's kind of going to be our focus today. We're going to talk a little bit about, what vocational rehabilitation is, and, how the process goes, those type of things that may be needed. This is, just that technical definition of voc rehabilitation. And I know all of us are here from different states. However, vocational rehabilitation has the same focus across the United States. It really is just about helping individuals who have some type of limitation or disability that impacts that ability when it comes to work. And that can mean a lot of different things. But it's just really about helping everyone gain the level of employment that they would like, or that they would, have. So here's the example where I said every state has, voc rehabilitation or VR, but each state, they call it something a little bit different. So Dawn had mentioned the Real Partners. So in those states, these are what those VR programs are called. All are, are very similar. A lot of them, they all pretty much have the same type of eligibility requirements that are there. There must be a documented disability. That disability has to impact employment in a variety, of ways, whether that's getting the job, doing the job, keeping it, or moving up within the world of work. And there's this statement that says benefits from vocational rehabilitation services. So basically what that is saying is that if an individual will achieve whatever those work goals are, they would benefit from that support from that voc rehab. First thing I kind of want to talk about, and for some of you, this is just kind of maybe a refresher if you have been attending the different series, throughout last year and the beginning of this year. So just always kind of like to remind, because it is a new vocabulary for some people. So just kind of talk about some of those things that happen. And I wanted to start out with a video that kind of looks at the point of VR and, what benefit would that be? So here's hoping that technology works today.
The fun part about this job is the day-to-day is always different and there's never a dull moment. My name is April Lynch and I'm a vocational rehabilitation counselor for Virginia Commonwealth University Rehabilitation Research and Training Center, and I work in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia Commonwealth University Rehabilitation Research and Training Center is a place for individuals with disabilities to come and receive employment services. It could be an individual with autism or maybe a mental health concern. It could be a physical disability or other cognitive disabilities. We are about to go visit one of my clients on their job site. We provide different types of employment services, which could be situational assessments, job development services, job site training. Each client's case is very individualized and depends on what their particular support needs are. The goal really is for them to obtain long-term employment. Hey Reed, how's it going?
I'm good.
Good to see ya. When I first met Reed, he might have been a person that was a little nervous to meet people. He's a young man with autism spectrum disorder. What we did was a job carve, customizing employment for that individual based on their strengths. We created a production associate position title where he is creating eco-friendly awards every day. For me, it is going around checking on my clients on their different job sites, identify where they're at in their process to see if any additional support is needed. Another skill that Reed picked up quite quickly in the beginning was assembling these boxes. Sometimes there might be additional teaching that needs to occur. I might help them get that skill and master it. I brought in Reed. They saw him in action. They loved his precision, his attention to detail. The qualifications of being
So that's just kind of a quick little glimpse into, what that VR process looks like and ultimately the outcome. I think that's one of the things with any type of support. It is that eligibility process and the just getting through and those different types of roles that, we need to take on. One of the things that VR programs across the United States have been spending a lot of time on is pre-employment transition services, or PREETs, may be what you hear it called. And again, I just kind of wanted to go over this because PREETs are are in place to help those transitioning youth. You know, I'm sure all of you heard that phrase, transition to adulthood. And PREETs from our Voc Rehab side have become very important in helping those youth transition to those next steps, and you know what that could potentially look like for that individual. With VR, they will help when it comes to education. So say it's some type of job or career that an individual needs some type of continued education or certification, VR can help and support that. Or sometimes the individual just wants to go right to work and do a more on the job learning and component. But PREETs are really in place to do that pre-work so that when someone is ready for a job, they're not just starting from the beginning. You know, if all of us think about our first job, we had a lot of learning to do. There were a lot of steps. You know, we had to learn how to become employees. We had to learn what that expectation meant. So PREET focus really is about helping introduce that young adult to increase that knowledge when it does come to that world of work. This is, you know, the eligibility piece is one thing with the PREETs, it is age. So for 14 to 22-year-olds that are actively still in school, some type of school or programming, you know, they have something that is called potentially eligible. And then from 14 to 25, they have services available to, again, help individuals reach whatever that work goal is. So I know some of you are probably familiar with the services, but I want to talk a little bit more about them and how, you know, that becomes part of that involvement with VR for a lot of, especially the young adults that do, you know, connect with VR at the age of 14 and up. This is sometimes their first exposure to the world of work. And a lot of times the counselors that that young adult is working with will want them to attend some type of these services. So there's job exploration counseling. So this service may be for an individual who isn't quite sure what they want to do, or maybe they have 2 or 3 different areas that they have high interest and they're just not really sure, you know, what they want to do. This side of it is really, you know, to help do some of that investigation, to dig in, to really think about, okay, so these are my options, these are my different pathways, and you know, what am I going to need in order to get there? There's work-based learning experiences. So there are ways for VR to help that young adult actually get some hands-on experiences. And I think, you know, these are all valuable services, but even when we think about ourselves, that first hands-on work experience was probably very different than what we at first thought it was going to be. You know, a lot of times when we see a job, we see things and we see the fun side. But sometimes actually doing the job, we see the sides that don't necessarily rise to the top as our favorite, but they are part of the job. So VR can help when it does come to some of those actual hands-on experiences. There is a part that talks about post-secondary options. You know, if you are thinking college, what colleges are you thinking? What is your ultimate work goal? What type of classes do you need to take in order to achieve that? And then once you have that degree, are there jobs out there? So there's a part around, you know, counseling for those post-secondary opportunities. There's workplace readiness training. And this is one I think that every young adult should really use. It is exactly how it sounds. That service is really about how do I become a good employee? How do I start to take on that responsibility of, you know, being an employee? Right now, these students in school, there's a lot of grace, there's a lot of support, there's a lot of help that's there. And how do they transition that when they do move into that world of work? What are business owners looking for in an employee? What are some of those soft skills that are needed to be a good employee? So that really focuses around those type of things, you know, everything from how to call in if you know you're not going to be that day, what it means to agree to working, you know, your shift for a week. How, you know, what does it mean to work with customers or even work with colleagues? So it's a way to build up those type of skills. And then there's instruction for self-advocacy. And this one I think is important, especially when we are talking about young adults with disabilities. You know, that self-advocacy side it's a lot deeper than just being able to speak up for yourself. It really is about knowing yourself, knowing what kind of help and support helps you be successful. It's for, you know, that individual to be okay with who they are. You know, this is me, this is what I bring to the table, and sometimes I need help or support in this area. So one of the things that we can really do to help stay engaged, you know, or get engaged with the VR system is to have an understanding of these services, so that when the young adult and, you know, as the family or caregivers start to have these discussions, that we have had that pre-conversation so that young adult knows what some of these potential services are, you know, while they're still in school, to help them get ready for those next steps. So, you know, these are all great services. This really is where a lot of VR programs are having discussions with the young adults that are reaching out to the VR systems as a way to support them, because right now school is their main job. But that doesn't mean that part-time, you know, we can't kind of start looking at some of these other ways, some of these other avenues to help better prepare them for those next steps. So a basic understanding of the services and the support. And this is just a snapshot. You know, VR programs offer more than this. I encourage all of you to look into your state VR system a little bit more, but I just want to use this snapshot for young adults, that this is what is being used to kind of help them move to the next step. Another part of
Tanya,
working, yep,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's a question about pre-ETS.
okay.
Does pre-ETS permit the transition staff to help students with job shadowing, not just the local CVS or the grocery store or hair salon, as part of job exploration? For example, job shadowing a train engineer or an auto mechanic.
So I would say based on what they are saying, yes, but each state, each agency, they're going to have their requirements of what a job shadowing is and who they reach out to. But based on what, PREET is, that job shadowing is considered a part of that job exploration side, to kind of determine, is this a job that I would like? So based on your question, I would say yes, but that again, each agency, they have their own ways that they can provide that job shadowing and the type of job shadowing that they connect with. All right.
That's
I'm
all we
hoping
have right now.
answer the question. Okay. All right. So one other thing that I think is important to bring up when we talk about young adults is sometimes the vocabulary changes. We're going from this, this school environment where there's, a team, there's a whole bunch of people that come together to help support that young adult, especially young adults who are getting some type of special education support or services. So I think it's important to start using the work world vocabulary, because what happens sometimes, when students start working with VR in school, they will have meetings, but then a lot of times once, there's a lot of talking for them or talking around them. But once they leave school, it falls on that young adult. The VR is looking at that young adult as that decision maker, as that, that individual. And I think sometimes I have seen a disconnect, or I've seen young adults become disengaged or uninvolved with VR, because now it's on them, and they weren't necessarily, brought along enough with the conversation, or, they're young adults. Maybe they didn't really see the value of it. Their role was a little bit different, being under the age of majority, that parent or caregiver is the ultimate decision maker at that point. So I think it's important, one, that they are part of as many conversations, and that we start using the vocabulary a little bit more with them to help them stay engaged in their process at the end of the day. And one of them is the Vocational Rehabilitation Counselor, or the VRC. So for a lot of students, what I do is kind of explain, right now when you're in school, you have the teachers. The teacher is that turnkey of information and connection. And once we're out in the VR world, we're working with a VRC, and that is the person that you will have these type of conversations with about what you are thinking after high school. What career are you looking at? Do you think you're going to need some type of continued education, or are you just going right to work? Another thing is the document. There is a document that is created, and it's called the Individual Plan of Employment. And I think sometimes, again, the young adult isn't necessarily always aware what this document is, because a lot of times when they're in school, yes, the youth is at the meeting, yes, they sign the document, but they don't necessarily always understand what that means. And just like when they are in school and they're getting special education support, that individualized plan, that IPE, the IEP is used. Now with VR, we use an IPE. And so it's just important for that young adult to know that that's an agreement between them and VR, and that they have had meetings, they have had discussions And it has been determined what type of support VR is going to provide to that young adult to figure out what those next steps are, or to help connect them to those next steps. So I think it's important for them to see it and also understand it, you know, when they do that. The IPE is written by VR. That VRC, the counselor, they are the ones that have the discussion with the young adult. They are the ones that determine the services and the supports that that young adult is eligible for. So that is written by VR, and then it is signed by the young adult and the counselor. And then it falls on the counselor to make sure any referrals that, you know, come out of that are sent to the appropriate agency, so that that young adult and that agency could connect and start providing the services. So again, this is in just a little more detail of the type of things that you would see on, you know, on that document. And I think, like I said, it's more from the perspective of the young adult to start to better understand what that document is and how that document is going to help them reach those next steps, you know, that next level of whatever that work goal is for them. I also like to just remind, you know, this of the process. That's one thing about, you know, the adult world right now in school. There's a lot of entitlements. There's a lot of regulations. There's laws. There's policies that are in place that, you know, are expected to be done, especially for students with disabilities. But once we, you know, move out of that school environment, we reach this world of eligibility. And so one thing about VR is it is voluntary. It is not given, VR does not come to you. You have to go to VR. You have to be able to express, you know, how, you know, that disability impacts you, how it's going to impact work. And I think this is always a really tough conversation for young adults. It's a tough conversation for adults. You know, we all need help and support in different areas. So I think having an understanding of what the process is going to look like is just another way of engagement. It is just another way to make sure that young adult is coming along and really making some of those decisions and really thinking about, you know, some of those questions that they may be asked and being able to answer them to the best of their ability. You know, it's nothing is in, so to say, concrete during the conversation. So sometimes during those conversations, during that process, there may be discovery of maybe a career area, a job area that was never thought about before, or through these conversations, it could just affirm that, you know, this is what they want to do. This is how they want to, you know, move forward when it comes to that world of work. So I think, you know, these kind of steps here, investigating your VR and the type of services, remember, just gave a snapshot of the pre-ep services, because those are the services that are really focused on young adults. But VR works with all ages. VR works from 14 up for anyone with a disability that wants support or help when it comes to employment. So they have other services they can offer too. So that young adult knowing what is available, knowing a little bit about those different services can be very beneficial and helpful when it comes to developing that individualized plan of employment or that IPE, to make sure that it's the services and the supports that are going to lead to what those potential, job outcomes may be for that young adult. The process usually starts in school. I believe most, they say usually, yes, it can start at 14, but usually 2 years prior of exit of school is when the conversations may get a little bit deeper, or sometimes, they're looking at what was done between 14 and 16 to help figure out that next step as they are getting ready to transition out into that adult world. So just kind of, having conversations about the process, and it needs to be more than one conversation. And I think that's the thing. I personally work a lot with young adults, and I'll ask them, well, has anyone talked to you about, in New York State, we call it Access VR. That's our VR system. Well, has anyone had a conversation with you about Access VR? And they're like, yeah, I think I heard it mentioned. And then come to find out, this young adult has had 3 or 4 meetings, and they really can't tell me that much other than, oh yeah, we met and we talked about it. So sometimes kind of taking a step back and, having, yes, the meeting, but having ongoing discussions about, okay, so you talked about that with your counselor. What are your next steps? What do you need to do in that process? Because that's something with the counselor, they will let that young adult know what the expectation is and kind of what their next steps are. It's that area where that transfer of ownership becomes really important as they're getting ready to step out into that adult world, because like I had mentioned, this is about eligibility. So it's voluntary. No one needs to use VR services. So if a young adult is acting like they're not interested, they're not getting the documentation back, they're just not, involved in that process, the case can be closed. This is not an entitlement. This is an eligibility. Can you show and support that you need that help? So having a discussion about that process and the role is another way to make sure that that student is engaged in that process and that it is going to, continue to move forward. I have another little video
Tanya,
here.
sorry, one more question.
Yep.
Is there anywhere where you can go to see examples of what an IPE looks like? I mean, I personally don't know if I've seen that. Have you?
No, because each one's going to be
Yeah.
very individual.
Yes.
I can look. I don't know if there is just a blank sample, but I know you will be very hard pressed to find one that is filled out to better show. But I can look, Dawn, to see if there are any blank samples, at least to kind of give the questions. But basically, it'll have whatever the VR code is for that service. It'll tell you how many units, so basically how many hours that individual is going to get of that service, and it tells you who is going to provide that service. But I've never seen availability for a public viewing of what that document looks like.
Okay. I agree. I haven't either. Thank you.
Yep. So I want to share another little example of, so we've gone through the process, we've been found eligible. So what potentially could the support look like for a young adult? So this is an example of a job placement specialist.
VESID, and job placement. The goal of the VESID program is long-term employment of persons with disabilities. VESID is an important funding stream for supports and services that help youth with developmental disabilities transition from school to work. The goal is long-term employment, and here is an example. Janufa is 20 years old. He and his employment trainer at VESID are working on interview skills for a job.
They begin by exploring Janufa's interests and strengths. Janufa expresses his goals for long-term employment. The VESID counselor listens. She helps Janufa explore supports and adaptations that will help him get a job that fits Janufa's skills and interests.
We're getting together to talk about some things that you need to do before you go into an interview. And I have a couple questions for you. Are there any restrictions that you have for work? Is there anything that you have problems with or you need help with from your employer?
No.
Can you lift everything?
Yep.
You don't have any problems there? No? Do you have any problems communicating or having people understand what it is you're saying? There are some things that you really need to remember when you're going to go to an interview. You need to have good hygiene. You know what that means? Have a shower, make sure you've washed your hair, brushed your teeth, all of those things that you're going to do if you want to impress somebody. You're going to remember to wear nice clothes like you're wearing today, to speak up and be clear when you talk, and think about what you want to answer when somebody asks you a question, okay?
The job coach helps Janufa understand how to dress and prepare for a job interview. She also provides Janufa with a chance to practice his interview skills.
Can you tell me why you want this job, Janufa? Do you know what the job is?
I do go landscaping, mowing lawns, stuff like that.
Okay, and that's
And weed whacking.
And weed whacking?
Mhm.
You've done all these things before?
Yep.
And where did you work before where you learned how to do these things?
My parents.
Oh, your parents own a company where you learned to do that?
Helping hands.
Very nice. Why do you think I should hire you for this position?
They're nice people, stuff like that.
You're good with people? Great. How are you about getting to work on time?
Good.
Good. And you come in every day or do you call in sick a lot?
I come in every day.
Oh, good. Do you have any restrictions for work?
I work at Naval too.
Oh, is that where you work now?
No, I guess for it's only once a week.
What do you do at Enable once a week?
Cleaning.
Okay, sounds good. What places have you applied?
So that's just a quick example of what that interaction could look like if it's determined that, for that plan of employment, that working on job placement. So this was an example of, practicing interview skills that could also include actually applying for the job, trying to set up the job interview. So it varies. And I think that's kind of what makes VR difficult sometimes, especially when we're looking for concrete examples. Just like their education plan, the employment plan is going to be very based on that individual. I've worked with young adults. They need a lot of help and support when it comes to job searching, the interview process, the applying. But once they get the job, they're going to be okay. They're not going to need much more support. Whereas I've worked with other individuals that they absolutely understand the interviewing process and they know how to apply for jobs. It's when they get to the job that they're going to need that help and support. Or some individuals need help with, the whole thing, getting the job to, actually getting it, and then need a little bit of help and support at the beginning of that job. But this is why knowing your VR and the services that they have to offer are important, because when you're having a conversation, then you know what to ask about and you can ask more clarifying questions. Well, what does that mean? What will that look like? It's just a great way to have that
Before, have you applied for any?
And stay engaged with that. So just want to talk a little bit more about those roles and responsibilities, these are conversations that the VR counselor will have with the young adult. And if you are here as a parent and a caregiver, yes, you can be in that room. Do not be surprised if that counselor has, especially if they're 18 or older, that counselor has that young adult sign a release saying it's okay for you to be there, because that counselor is looking to that young adult to be able to voice and express what they are thinking and what they are hoping for. But we all know that it is a process, that this is a learning curve. And so, we're there to support, we're there to guide as an educator on this side. When I as a transition coordinator, having conversations with the young adult, we do talk about that, of being able to express, what you need. They have to be willing to meet with that counselor and have a conversation. Like I said, this is voluntary. And if a counselor feels like that young adult, and, let's be honest, we have some young adults that may not fully understand the benefits of using VR. And so we may need to do a little bit more of, the guided conversations with them. They have to, stay in contact with that counselor. If the counselor calls them or emails them or mails them something or is requesting something back, they need to make sure that is being provided. That's a big discussion, especially if VR is helping with continued education. So if continuing, helping with some type of, college or trade school or certifications, they often require grades and the course schedules, their schedule for the semester. And if that is not turned into the counselor can close that case. It's part of the requirements. It's that justification as to why VR is helping support that young adult. Keeping in appointments are very important. One thing with VR, at least in New York State, is the counselor tells you the time and the date. It's not a working of scheduling, but if for some reason that time and date doesn't work, it's very important that young adult reaches out to that counselor to have to reschedule it, or let that counselor know that they're not able to make that date and time. Because again, if there's no contact, the counselor is going to make a couple attempts, but then they're going to close the case because they're going to think either they no longer want the service, or maybe they've gotten a job, so they don't need them anymore. And they can just close it. Now, if that does happen, you can go back as many times as you want to VR. It is not a one and done. This is from, 14 up when it comes to work and employment. But this kind of goes back to my conversation in the beginning of, if we make sure the young adult understands what this is, there's more likelihood of that follow through and that better understanding of why they would want help, or why they would participate in the VR program. They have to follow any medical treatment, any recommendations by the doctor. They have to make sure they're providing any of that documentation that is needed, and just stay in contact. As a parent, I think this is one of those areas where that change really does start to happen, where we need to start backing off. We're there more as a support, not the voice. And I know sometimes that's difficult because we have had to be their voice. We have had to advocate. We have, for some, had to fight for them when it came to their special education support. So sometimes it's tough when we move into this adult side of the world to know that our role kind of changes. And a lot of it goes back to us providing, being supportive, and having those ongoing conversations, helping them kind of come up with what their options and choices are, and then figuring out, based on the experiences they've had or the exposures they had, which is the best one for them, and letting them speak for themselves. And I think this is always the tough part, because, sometimes with young adults, when you ask them a question, it's not always an immediate response, or sometimes it's just a one-word response. And I think even myself, as an adult, sometimes we struggle with that, especially when we know the young adult and we have a deeper answer to the question, but really encouraging them to have a conversation and not just a response to those questions will be very beneficial with them. Again, just checking in with them and making sure they understand the benefits of those resources that are available to them, and have open, honest conversations, about why this service is there and how it will help them down the road. I think it becomes tough too. I think a lot of young adults, sometimes we ask them questions that they really just don't know the answer to, or there may be, anxiety or fear sometimes that they don't want to answer that question. So they learn, if they just look at the adult next to them, that the question will get answered for them. So it is, again, it's a great time to start preparing them for those adult decisions, and, how they're coming up with them themselves. And, the open, honest conversations, part of that is being willing to accept you are not going to agree with everything that they say. And we need to be okay with that. We need to know how to have a conversation, not a you will or you have to. It's more of a conversation of, I'm not sure if that's what I was thinking. Why are you thinking that? So that it can move forward. Because at the end of the day, if the young adult does not want to participate in VR, they do not have to. And all they have to do is tell that counselor one time, yeah, I don't want to do this. And the counselor will ask them again, and they'll say, nope, I don't want to do it. And they're like, okay, we'll close your case. So I think when I think of VR and the roles and the responsibilities that people play, I think that's one of the big sides of it, is really knowing, at the end of the day, we need to make sure they have a true understanding of VR and why they would want to be using those supports and those resources. I see we are getting close to time. So I know you will receive this PowerPoint, so I'm not going to have time to do these little videos because I want to make sure there's time for any questions or anything like that. So I just want to end it with, it does sound like a lot of work, but it honestly is worth it. I always explain to the young adults and their families or caregivers that it's like a little safety net. It's something there to help support them achieve their success. And what their success looks like is going to vary. It really is going to depend on them. So by going through this process, by putting in the time, by having the conversations, that hopefully this does lead to success. And I have worked with a lot of youth over the years that they have found success, both if they just decide to go to work, but also if they have chosen to go to college. And VR has helped them through that process. So VR helps them, when it comes to the continued education piece. But then once they have achieved, they've got that degree, they go back to the Access VR counselor and say, okay, now I'm ready to find a job. How can you help me find a job? So at the end of the day, VR services are great. They are a great safety net, and it is something that they can use and access, you know, throughout the years. I worked with one young adult. He wanted to go into manufacturing. He worked with Access VR. Part of manufacturing, there is a lot of safety rules and regulations, and he has had to pass some OSHA certifications. So he, you know, needed Access VR support to help him, you know, have the conversation with his employer about needing accommodations on these type of certifications. And then he worked, he got the job, he was there for 10 years, and he actually called the counselor back up because now he wanted to move up to management. So he needed their help again. So just keep that in mind, that as we go through phases, we close out one, but we can always go back and open up more. So that is.
There is a question,
Okay.
Tanya.
Okay.
Someone is asking, and I'm going to put the poll up while we're doing this.
Okay.
Someone is, there you go. Someone is asking, oh, I got to move one to do the other. Okay. What cutoff age for Access VR services in New York? So rather than in general, let's just give, unless it's different for New York, but in general, is there an age cutoff for VR?
No, nope. To the best of my knowledge, at least in New York, I have not investigated others, but like I said, VR is pretty similar across the board when it comes to those type of things, that you, as long as you are able to work and a doctor is filling out a form saying that you physically, mentally, emotionally can work, there is no age limit. I think what it really comes down to sometimes when VR says they can't support the individual is that sometimes that individual may need more support and longer help than VR is meant to provide. So this is where they may refer you to other state agencies, like, for your offices of individuals with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, because VR is kind of meant to be a get in, help you get the job, you maintain it, and then our services stop until you need us again. So I know in New York State, I believe the last time I heard, they had someone who was 72 years old that was using Access VR services.
I did put in the poll should be launched right up on your screen. You should see it. I don't know why you wouldn't, right? Does everyone else see it? Do you see it, Tanya, the poll?
I do see the poll.
Okay.
Sometimes you go down on the bottom on your little bar where your mic and Zoom is. If you push the more, sometimes it just needs to be brought to the front.
Oh, okay. I did put in the chat that if they need more information about VR, you can, one, look at the recordings on our Real Transition webpage, which I posted there, but also reach out to your parent center in your state if you're not in New Jersey. SPAN is the parent center in New Jersey, and the parent network of Western New York is up in Buffalo, but there's also a parent center at least a parent center or a community resource center in every state. Go to parentcenterhub.org. I put that in the chat. You'll find someone. You're going to receive a copy of this in the email that you registered with on Eventbrite. It'll come through Eventbrite with a copy of the recording as well. But I also indicated to go to your VR website, because every VR agency, you can register for services differently. In New Jersey, there's an application right on our website. It may not be that for other states. So go on the VR website and find out how you can apply for yourself or your child or your young adult, whoever it may be. Let's see, are there no other questions? You can put your comments in the chat. Unfortunately, the poll does not allow a comment section, but if you have comments that you would like to say about this, if it was helpful, if it was not helpful, if you would like more information on a topic with regard to employment, transition to employment, put the comment in the chat, because we're always looking for webinars to figure out what topics would really help people. So please put that in the chat. You know, we used to have a link for an evaluation where you could click on it and go somewhere else and you could leave more information, but nobody was doing it. This is the best way for us to get your thoughts. So, okay, it's under more, you can find it, I guess, because I see it right on my screen, but not everybody may see that, so. But I want to thank Tanya, as always, Tanya, so informative and great, and your webinars are always very succinct with lots of information. So thank you so much for doing this. And then if you have any other questions, you can reach out to your parent center. Again, most parent centers have a warm line you can call. So, and parentcenterhub.org is where you would find that. This webinar will also be on our website once the recording is ready. So it'll be there, it'll live there, which actually links to our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate you joining us. Hopefully you'll join the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye now.